Hey all you addicts out there, welcome back to another addicted fishing tutorial. My name's Jordan Knigge. If you guys are new to this channel, go down here and hit subscribe and hit that little bell notification. We're Addicted Fishing and we aim to entertain, inspire, and educate anglers like you from all walks of life to get out here and have more fun fishing. What we're doing today is we're talking about something special. We're talking about steelhead fishing and we're talking about how to drift fish beads. So if you guys want to learn more about how to drift fish beads and use the beads as a different presentation than what you normally see out there, stay tuned, it's coming at you right now. First things first, like always, we're going to start talking about the rod. What I have here in my hand is one of my favorites. It's the 9.2 8 to 17 pound Guide Select Pro, and this is in the bait casting model. This one has the Helios reel on it with a 30-pound braid. I always stick with the braid on these setups because this, especially because we're going to be bouncing the bottom and ticking bottom as we go throughout the day, the braid offers that much more sensitivity and it helps along in line with that same style of rod that's used for drift fishing. The reason I'm going to always say you want to use a bait caster normally if you're going to be drift fishing is because you allow yourself a lot more sensitivity. One, in the way you hold the rod, and two, in the length and the sensitivity of that drift fishing rod. So this 8 to 17 pound rating, it works really, really well. And it's nice to have that bait casting model because you can actually let line out and you can dump line or bring line back depending on how much depth you're working with in the river and how you want to drift that stuff along the bottom. So that's most important, is going to be staying down. So again, I have a 30-pound braid reeled on this. I like to stick with that 30-pound and not go any heavier and maybe even lighter sometimes. And mainly that is so your line can cut through the water. If you get too heavy up into the 40s and 50s in the braided line, you're going to start getting a lot of line drag, and it's going to keep you from getting that light presentation like this. Like you see, I have this small piece of lead, which we'll get to here in a minute. You have a hard time getting that stuff to the bottom if you do have a heavier line. So a 30-pound is about as heavy as I'm going to go. You can also use this exact same setup with the exact same line weight in the Guide Select Pro 8 to 17, and this is in the spinning model. Spinning model works just as fine. If it's all you have, you don't need to go out and buy a new rod or some kind of bait casting setup to fish this. You can fish your normal rod you'd use for hardware. That's what you see. I have this one rigged up with a spinner. If I wanted to do something with this, I'd cut that spinner off and I'd do the setup that I'm about to show you. So the spinning model does work just as well in that 8 to 17 pound, but it's good to have a good sensitive rod in that medium action so that you can have a lot of that bottom and a lot of that banging on the bottom of your lead registered through your line down into your hand. Anything longer than about 9.5 feet is going to have too much flimsiness, and you're not going to have enough sensitivity to feel the bottom and keep yourself off the rocks and off of the snags. So what I've done here is to start my setup is I've added about a 20-pound fluorocarbon or monofilament bumper to the end of my braided line with the blood knot. You've seen us do this a lot in these tutorials. I like to use the bumper on this setup, one, so it takes the visibility of that high vis line away from those fish because you're right down in their face with it, and two, it's so you don't leave a lot of braided line on the bottom of the river. I'd rather break off my fluorocarbon, that way I'm not filling my holes up with big pieces of braided line, which I can continue to get snagged on over and over, and it can almost ruin a fishing hole sometimes if you do get too much braided line snagged on the bottom. So I had that 20-pound bumper, one for visibility and two to keep the river a little cleaner. What I do there is about a 4.5 to a 5 foot bumper. You can go all the way up to 10 foot, doesn't really matter, but I feel like it'll take away from your sensitivity the more and more bumper that you add on there. So normally I'll stick with about 3 to 5 feet of bumper. What I then do is I go just straight to a normal barrel swivel here. This is just your typical, I believe this is like a size 4 barrel swivel. What I'm gonna do is tie my heavy line, my 20-pound, to the end that's gonna have that snap swivel on, or that clasp on there. Why that is because I'm gonna put my weight of whatever sort I'm gonna use onto that side, and I wanna be able to actually pull against that weight with the heavier line and not my 12-pound leader line if I am getting snagged. That'll help you lose less leaders. Let's go ahead and just gonna do a normal fisherman's knot to that side of it, just like so. Pull that tight, and there you go. What I like to add on the end of that, it depends on what your water clarity is, but I like to go with just a normal 12-pound test, fluorocarbon once again. And this is probably the most important part of this setup and of this tutorial, is the length of leader that you're going to use to adjust to the kind of bead that you're going to use. Your length is going to vary. If you're using bigger presentations and bigger beads, you want to go with a shorter leader. If you're using smaller beads and smaller presentations in slower water, you're going to want to go with a little bit longer leader. And that's so that has time to float. It gets away from your setup in that slow water so that you're not seeing your lead and all your other line and that heavier gauge line in front of those fish. If you're in fast water, you want to use a little bit shorter leaders, and if you're in slow water, you want to use a little bit longer. So big beads, short leader; fast water, short leader; small beads, longer leader; slow water, longer leader. if that makes any sense to you guys. Stick with me here. So what I'm gonna do though, normally I'm never really gonna use much more than about 4.5 to 5 foot a leader. If you're getting up in the 6, 7, 8s, you're really kind of posing the chance of snagging more fish and not ethically fishing that way, something they call flossing. We wanna stay away from that. Nobody will ever get mad at you for drift fishing next to them on the river if you go ahead and stick with a shorter leader. And that is because it's unethical in a lot of places. So what I do, how I usually measure out my line length is I put we're all different sizes of course, but I put the spool in my chest, grab one end, and I go 1 arm length out. And that normally gives me the perfect amount of line that I need for this setup. In a general case, if I'm gonna be starting off with like a 10 or a 12 millimeter bead. So I'll show you here. Make a nice cut. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add that 12-pound fluoro to the other end of that barrel swivel just like so. Just a normal fisherman's knot. You can use any multitude of knots that you guys like to use out there in the world, whatever you have the most confidence in, because as we know with fishing, the confidence is key. So there we have it. I'm gonna get rid of that little tag in there because I like my stuff to be nice. So there I have it. There's my leader going out about 4 feet or so to the end of my hook here. So now what I'm gonna do, there's a lot of different ways that you can get this stuff down to the bottom. Whether it's pencil lead that's hollow cord and you add a little piece of string or a piece of line to your swivel and actually slide that up and crimp it down. I don't like to do that method quite as much. It allows you to not lose as much of your setups, but it also leaves a lot of lead in the river during fishing this setup. So I try to go with anything like a Dave's Tangle Free, or actually punch a hole in some sort of pencil lead so that it sticks on my line a little bit better and I can actually pull pretty hard on it and get it unsnagged rather than just pulling my lead off every single time and leaving all that massive lead in the river. So all I've done here, so taking my pliers, taking a normal chunk of solid pencil lead, taking the end of it, crimped it down with my Gerber pliers here, taking a hook, poke a little hole right in that lead with a hook. You can see it just pushes right through there, made my hole, and I'm just gonna add that right onto my snap swivel here. Just like so. It works really nicely. And the cool part is you can go through and make 10, 12 of these at night at home or before you get started on the river, put them in your pocket. And if you do lose any gear, you can just reach in, grab your already hole punch lead, throw it on and get back to fishing. So now to the business end. As you guys see, I have my box of beads open here. There's all kinds of colors, there's all kinds of sizes. The only difference that it's gonna make in how you present this or how you fish it, again, is gonna be what size of bead you're fishing. So I'm just gonna go with your typical 12 mil setup that I would use a normal about 4.5 foot leader for. If you're going up and above 14, up to the 16, 18, 20, 22 mil beads, like we see a lot out here in the Pacific Northwest nowadays, you have to understand that those beads have a ton of flotation because they're big. They have a lot of surface area. So you're gonna use a shorter amount of leader because it's not gonna take much to keep that right in the strike zone. If you have a 6 foot or an 8 foot leader with that big bead, it's gonna float all the way up 6 to 8 feet to the surface where it's gonna wanna be, and your lead's down here on the bottom doing its thing, and your gear's never gonna be in front of those fish. So all I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna reach for just a good old fashioned red model bead. So one of the most important things that you're gonna have to realize when you start to bead fish, and especially in drift fishing, is the hook gap and the bead gap from your hook. So I'm gonna show you a couple different ways to peg your bead and keep it above your hook, because you're always gonna want it about 3 finger lengths away from your hook, and that is so that fish can grab that bead and that hook can slide right into the maxillary fin in the side of its mouth and hold on and get a good hook set while you are drifting this down there. It's the biggest thing with beads, and a lot of people hate them, is because you lose a lot of fish. But if you can get your bead spaced away from your hook just right, and you can set the hook properly, when you do get a take, that hook will actually go right into the side of its mouth where you can almost not even get it out of there. So one of the tricks that I use, that's easy, it's quick, it doesn't take buying anything extra, I just do a typical little bead knot on here. And with a good 12-pound test or 15-pound test, you can get away with this. If you're going with the lighter lines, the 8-pound tests or so, you're probably not going to want to do this because it's going to cause a little abrasion on that line. But with a good high-quality 12-pound test of fluorocarbon, this will work just fine. So what I've done here is I passed that line through the hole of the bead, ran it all the way back around. I'm going to pass it through there once again. And this is probably one of my favorite ways to do this if I'm drift fishing, because you are going to be hitting bottom a lot, you are going to be snagging, and you want to be able to rip that out of there without having your bead slide down every single time. And this is a really good way to ensure that that bead's not going to go anywhere on your line, so you can see it's not going to slide back and forth. So then what I'll do from there is I'll take either a size 4 or a size 2 hook, whichever tickles your fancy, and depends on really what kind of bead you're using. If I'm going to go with anything above a 12 mil, I'm probably going to stick with the size 2. Anything smaller, I'm going to go with a size 4. And me personally, with these bead hooks, I just do a normal fisherman's knot. I don't get too fancy. A good polymer knot works really good in this setup too, but I'm just going to do it the easy way, just like so. and you're set up. Bam. So that's one way to secure your bead. I'm going to cut this off really quick and I'm going to show you guys the other way using a toothpick or some sort of rubber stop. So the next thing I'm going to show you guys, the next option for pegging this bead, and again, why this is so imperative to have your bead pegged away from your hook is because, as you see, if that bead does slide down, and this is normally when you're going to lose your fish, when that bead slides down, it covers up the amount of hook gap that's exposed from that number 2 hook. And you don't want to go very big on these hooks because you want this bead to naturally float down the bottom of the river. And you're obviously going to be dragging, so too heavy a presentation at the end of your line is going to constantly get snagged. So the fish grabs it. I'm going to actually go ahead and just show you here. The other option, if you're using maybe a little bit lighter line, or you're scared that you're breaking fish off by running that bead knot, you just use a normal toothpick or one of the rubber stoppers that comes with the Brad's beads. You run it in there just like that, cut it off just over flush, like so. I'm going to use the little end of my scissors and actually push that down the rest of the way. And we're secured. That bead is nice and tight on there. But again, you can see why I like my bead knot more, because even still, that's about as tight as I'm going to be able to hold that thing down, but that's about as far, and that's about as much as it's going to move. So, but again, why it's so imperative to have that hook gap just like so is because it covers up your hook gap if it slides down, and this allows the fish to grab it just like so. You set hook nice and slow, and it goes right into the side of that fish's mouth just like that, and is not going to come off. I find I lose a lot less fish when I drift fish beads as well, rather than running them under an indicator where you have a lot of line out from your indicator, and when the fish takes it, you have to pick up all that line before the fish actually gets hooked. So stick with us. I'm going to stand up here. I'm going to show you guys some good drift fishing water, and then we're going to show you guys some good technique and how you want to fish these drift fishing setups. All right, so when you're looking for a good piece of drift fishing water, you're going to mainly look for the bead water. And what I mean by bead water is something that's about chest to nose height. If you were to jump in, say it's about 4 to 6 feet. It's about walking speed, and it's got either a lot of gravel or a lot of small structure. You don't want to pick out spots with big boulders or big giant tombstone-y rocks to try to drift fish in, because you're going to constantly get snagged in whatever is hung up between those rocks or the rocks themselves. So as you look behind us here, we have about a 200 to 300 yard tail out here, maybe 400 yards. Nice, beautiful gravel wash, big boulders, and I'm with my glasses on with like a good pair of polarized glasses. These Smiths are awesome. A good pair of polarized glasses is going to make you a little bit more effective, and it's going to help you lose less gear because you can see the boulders and you can see the structure that you're aiming at. You want to cast to that structure and fish behind it. But what you want to do, especially with this, is fish your 45s. So I found my good walking speed run. It's got a lot of gravel, it's got some nice boulders. I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to slowly work my way down, taking the 2 steps after each cast, a lot like I preach in the spinner tutorials. And if you're in a boat like we are now, I'm going to make my cast, fish my 45s, pull my anchor, move down, and I'm going to keep fishing like so. But what I mean by fish your 45s is always going to start my cast about 45 so I can get my gear down, and I'm going to end it about 45 degrees so that I'm not drifting too far and missing those hook sets if I do get a bite further down below me. What I'm going to do, I'm going to cast her across. Immediately I'm going to bring my line tight. I'm going to keep my rod tip pointed right at that setup the whole time. It's going to start dragging here. You see my lines bouncing, my tips bouncing. If you need to, you're going to give it slight little lifts just to pull it off the bottom. And if it is getting snagged too much right off the bat, you're going to have to downsize in your Dave's tangle, or have to cut down your pencil lead a little bit so that you can get a good natural drift across the bottom. But as you see, I'm following my gear the entire time, going from 45 degrees up to 45 degrees down below me. And when I get down to the bottom, I'm going to close my bail and I'm going to start reeling back in. One thing that I have a habit of sometimes that might not work for you if you're just a beginner is keeping my bail open so that you can feed line and you can actually let that fish take it when you do get a bite. So, start it again. 45 degrees upriver, I'm going to reel it down tight. I'm going to start hitting bottom. And the key to keeping that rod tip pointed at your bead the whole time while you're drift fishing is so that you can feel that sensitivity. What happens if I leave my rod tip in one direction here and I hold against it, you can see it instantly. I create a swing in my presentation. My line's slowly starting to work its way across towards me rather than down the river in a straight line. The beauty of using a drift fishing setup to fish a bead is that it slows it down even more than your bobber setup, where you have your bead getting drugged down river by your weight as well as your bobber setup. So the drift fishing setup is a great way to counteract fish that have had a lot of pressure, or fish little slots in areas that you can't normally get down with your float because you're getting ripped through the hole too fast. So once you've dialed in your weight and you've dialed in your run, and you're actually, I recommend a lot of times starting off fishing these drift fishing setups like this in a run that you're already familiar with. Spots where you know the snags are, spots where you might know exactly where the fish sit, so that you can use that to pinpoint and really stay in front of those fish's faces if you have a high water scenario, or again, you're fishing a fast slot that you can't necessarily get down in. So once you've dialed in your weight and you've dialed in your speed of your drift, what you're gonna feel, and what we're gonna talk about a little bit about the hook set and what you're actually gonna feel, it's a lot different than anything else. When a fish hits a drift fishing setup, it's either like a freight train or you don't feel anything at all. What I mean by that is as you drift fish through, you'll start to get a really good recognition with a good sensitive rod. You'll be able to tell rock, 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 stick, bottom, sand, big boulder. But what you'll feel if a fish picks it up is either a straight just wham. It's either right to fish on, and or you'll feel nothing at all. Some of the takes that I get almost most often when I'm doing this is when a fish grabs that bead, comes out of its zone, grabs that bead and swims with that bead downriver. So what I mean by that is you'll be drifting along, you'll feel the ticking, you'll feel the tacking, and all of a sudden you won't feel anything at all. And you'll see your line slack, and you'll start to reel and start to reel, and that fish has actually grabbed that bead and started swimming towards you. So sometimes feeling nothing at all is just as important as feeling that rod get ripped out of your hand. And with the drift fishing setup, in my opinion, it's one of the most exciting takes that you can experience out here fishing for steelhead. So to wrap it all up, you guys, drift fishing beads is another great way to get out there and catch steelhead. It's a very effective presentation when nothing else is working, and one when you need to really get down in front of those fish. Works in all kinds of water, but use it in particular in spots that you know you can catch fish on beads to begin with. If you guys enjoyed this video today, be sure to let us know. Drop a little comment below and give us a thumbs up, and let us know what you guys want to see more of. We come out with these tutorials every single day, so take a look in the link in the description to our YouTube page. Go out there and have some fun. You guys stay fishy, and thank you so much for tuning in today.